I am Cristina, 34 years old, and tonight was supposed to be the beginning of my new life. The wedding dress still smelled faintly of roses and dust from the old church aisle, the veil folded neatly in a box in the corner of the hotel suite where my husband and I have been sent to spend our first night together. Everything felt staged, rehearsed, almost like I was living inside someone else's story rather than my own. My cheeks still ached from the endless smiling at relatives, and my fingers bore faint marks from gripping champagne, flutes too tightly while people toasted to a future I hadn't yet had time to imagine. The night should have been ordinary in its extravagance, filled with whispered promises and nervous laughter, but instead it became the setting for the single most terrifying moment of my life. The lamp on the bedside table hummed softly, flickering just once, enough for me to glance at it uneasily. My husband, Adrian, sat across from me, removing his tie with practiced ease, his expression unreadable. I had been watching him closely since the ceremony, trying to decode the man I had promised forever to just hours earlier. He seemed attentive, careful but also distant, as if pieces of him were already somewhere else. The silence between us grew heavier until the sound of my phone shattered it. A shrill vibration danced across the dresser, rattling against the mirror frame. I reached instinctively, but Adrian's hand shot out, pressing against mine with a force that startled me. His eyes calm but commanding met mine, and in a voice barely louder than the whisper of the air conditioner, he said, "Don't pick up the phone." My heart lurched in my chest. The phone continued buzzing insistently, the screen glowing against the dim light. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my skin prickling with unease. Why not pick it up? Who could it be at this hour? When the call ended, I thought the moment had passed, but seconds later, the phone lit up again, this time with a message notification. I turned my head toward the screen, just as Adrian loosened his grip, and what I saw carved fear straight into my bones. "Your husband isn't who he seems to be." The message glared at me like a wound torn open in the middle of the night. Impossible to ignore. Impossible to mend with logic. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt an odd stillness creep into the room, as though time itself was holding its breath alongside me. Adrian hadn't seen the phone yet. His gaze was fixed on me, studying every micro-expression, every twitch in my face, as if he was silently daring me to reveal what I had just read. My palms grew damp, the device trembling in my grip, while 1,000 questions erupted in my head like sparks from a dying fire. Who would send such a message? And more importantly, why now, on this night? The night meant to seal trust and intimacy. I forced a nervous laugh, pretending to check the time instead of the words burning on the screen. But my chest was pounding so hard that I feared he might hear it echo through the silence. Adrian leaned closer, his shadow stretching over me, and in that moment I realized just how little I truly knew the man I had married. His voice was soft, but there was a sharpness underneath, like a blade hidden in velvet. "What does it say?" The question was simple, but it coiled around me with suffocating weight. I hesitated, and hesitation is a language of its own. He understood it instantly. His eyes darkened and the air between us grew thicker, pressing against me like invisible hands. I shook my head and lied. "It's nothing. Just spam." The words slipped out brittle and fragile, and I hated how unconvincing they sounded even to my own ears. He didn't argue, didn't press further, but the curve of his lips twisted into something between amusement and warning. That smile, polite, deliberate, rehearsed, made my stomach twist violently. The phone buzzed again, almost on cue, another message appearing like a bullet through the fragile glass of my lie. "He's dangerous. Don't trust him." My vision blurred for a second, my body trapped between the instinct to flee and the impossibility of moving at all. Adrian tilted his head, finally glancing toward the phone, and his smile vanished. He reached forward, quick and precise, snatching the device from my hands. The room grew icy, and I realized that whatever secret this night carried, I was now caught in the storm of it. Adrian's fingers curled around my phone with a grip that seemed too practiced, too controlling, like a man who had done this before, as though he expected me to receive messages that needed intercepting. My stomach twisted with nausea as he tapped the screen once, glanced at the sender, and then, without a flicker of hesitation, turned the device off completely. The decisive snap of the power button felt louder than any scream, sealing me in a prison where my voice had no exit. "You don't need this tonight," he said, his tone deceptively casual, that the undertow of menace dragged every syllable into darkness. He set the phone on the nightstand, screen face down, and returned to unbuttoning his shirt, movements calm, deliberate, like someone who had just disposed of evidence instead of a trivial inconvenience. I watched him through lowered lashes, fear clawing at my chest, but I forced myself to remain still, calculating. If the messages were real, then someone out there was trying to warn me. Someone knew something. But if they were a cruel trick, then I had just handed my husband a reason to doubt me, and doubt could be as dangerous as truth in the wrong hands. I thought of the ceremony earlier, the vows spoken, the audience applauding, my mother's tear-streaked face in the crowd. Everyone had seen us as a perfect couple stepping into forever. No one would believe that within hours, the very foundation of that forever was already cracking. Adrian moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes scanning my face as if he were memorizing it. "Cristina," he said, my name rolling off his tongue slowly. "You and I are going to have a life free of secrets, aren't we?" My throat tightened, but I nodded, whispering a weak yes. He reached for my hand, holding it with surprising gentleness, yet beneath that gentleness I felt the iron of restraint, the promise of control. My pulse quickened, and in the silence that followed, I heard the faintest sound from the hallway footsteps, hesitant, stopping just outside the door. Adrian's head snapped toward the noise, his body instantly alert, his smile gone. For the first time that night, I saw fear cross his face, and that terrified me more than any warning text ever could. The silence that followed those footsteps was suffocating, heavier than any silence I had ever known. It wasn't just quiet, it was calculated, purposeful, like whoever stood beyond that door wanted us to know they were there, lingering, waiting for the right moment. My breath hitched, and I instinctively reached for Adrian's arm, but he didn't move. His entire body had gone still, his eyes fixed on the door with an intensity that revealed far more than he wanted me to see. That flicker of fear I had caught earlier was no longer fleeting, it was alive, throbbing beneath his carefully constructed facade. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" Though I already knew he had. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pressed a finger to his lips, a sharp command for silence, and slid off the bed without making a sound. Watching him move across the room, barefoot on the carpet, I realized something chilling. He wasn't surprised by the noise, he was expecting it. My heart thundered against my ribs as I clutched the sheets, straining to hear more. But the footsteps had ceased, leaving only the low hum of the air conditioning, and the relentless pounding in my ears. Adrian approached the door and paused, hand hovering over the handle. He didn't fling it open in anger or call out into the hallway. Instead, he leaned forward, listening, his entire posture coiled like a predator stalking prey. A minute dragged by, each second stretching into eternity, before he finally turned the lock with a slow, deliberate click. He didn't open it. He just locked it. That sound, the metallic bite of the bolt sliding in two, place sliced through me with dreadful certainty. Whatever was outside, he didn't want it coming in. He returned to the bed, his face once again smoothed into that unreadable calm, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside. "It's nothing," he said, too quickly. "Just the hotel staff." His words were meant to reassure, but they failed spectacularly. I wasn't stupid. Hotel staff didn't stand silently outside bridal suites at midnight, and they certainly didn't vanish without knocking or speaking. The air felt electrified, charged with secrets. I curled closer to the edge of the bed, every instinct screaming at me that danger wasn't just outside. That door, it was sitting right beside me. Sleep was impossible. Even if exhaustion pulled at my bones, fear kept me wired. Every nerve stretched thin like a violin string on the verge of snapping. Adrian lay beside me, his breathing steady, almost too steady, like the controlled rhythm of someone pretending to sleep. I turned slightly, careful not to make the mattress shift, and studied him in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. His face was peaceful, but not in the way a man's should be after the happiest day of his life. There was no trace of tenderness, no lingering smile from the vows or the dance or the laughter of our guests. Instead, there was tension in the set of his jaw, the faint twitch in his closed eyelids, the way his fingers curled tightly into fists even in rest. My phone, abandoned on the nightstand where he had left it, taunted me in the darkness. The thought of those messages burned into my mind. Someone, somewhere, was trying to warn me. I needed to know more. With painstaking slowness, I slid my hand out from under the covers, stretching toward the device, praying that the faintest creak of the bed springs wouldn't betray me. My fingertips brushed the cool glass screen when Adrian's hand shot out like a striking snake, clamping over mine. His eyes were wide open, pupils dilated, and the smile he gave me was the kind that froze my blood. "Couldn't resist, could you?" he whispered, his voice low but sharp, the words slicing through the quiet. My chest constricted, and I tried to pull my hand back, but his grip tightened. "Cristina," he continued, his tone softening, though it was no less terrifying, "trust is everything between us. If you break that tonight, then we have nothing." He let go slowly, deliberately, and turned onto his back, as though the conversation were finished. I rolled away, my heart hammering so violently, I thought it might bruise my ribs. The message on the screen might still be waiting, but it no longer mattered. The greater danger wasn't outside that locked door. It was lying inches away, watching me even with his eyes closed. The minutes crawled into hours, though time felt untrustworthy, elastic, bending in ways that made the night stretch endlessly. I lay on my side, feigning sleep, but every cell in my body was awake, humming with dread. Adrian's breathing had evened out again, slow and deliberate, but I no longer trusted its rhythm. Was he truly asleep? Or was he watching me through slitted eyes, waiting for me to make another mistake? My throat was dry, my lips cracked, and I could feel the thrum of my pulse in places I shouldn't, the tips of my fingers, the hollow of my stomach, the arches of my feet. I needed air, space, escape, but the room itself seemed alive, walls closing in, shadows lengthening in impossible ways. My eyes darted toward the window. Heavy curtains pulled shut, yet faint city light seeped through the seams. For a fleeting second, I imagined tearing them open and screaming into the night, but the thought of Adrian's reaction anchored me in silence. Then, the phone vibrated again. Not a ring this time, a vibration low, insistent, muffled beneath the weight of his earlier command. I froze, waiting to see if Adrian stirred. He didn't. The device buzzed once more, a pulse against the wood, and curiosity overwhelmed fear. Slowly, painstakingly, I reached out, moving an inch at a time until my fingers curled around it. I shielded the screen beneath the blanket, pressing the side button just enough to illuminate the words. My lungs locked. The message wasn't text, it was an image. A photograph. My wedding gown, hanging in the corner earlier, now crumpled on the floor, smeared with something dark that looked disturbingly like blood. I turned my head in panic, but the dress was still hanging there, perfectly clean, untouched. My mind reeled. Was the photo a warning of what was to come? Or proof that something had already happened? and I simply hadn't seen it yet. A sound escaped me, a faint gasp I couldn't contain. Adrian shifted beside me, rolling slightly, and in the dim glow I caught his eyes open again, glinting with a sharpness that told me he had been awake all along. Adrian's eyes didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't carry the hazy fog of someone waking from slumber. They were sharp, alive, and locked onto mine with a stillness that felt inhuman. My chest rose and fell too quickly, betraying the panic flooding me, and for a moment we just stared at each other in that fragile, electric silence. Then, in a voice so calm it chilled me more than a shout ever could, he asked, "What did you just see?" The question wasn't casual, it was precise, surgical, like he already knew the answer, and was waiting for me to expose myself with the wrong word. I swallowed hard, clutching the phone under the blanket, its heat pressing against my skin like a brand. My mind scrambled for lies, but every possible excuse felt paper thin, destined to crumble under his gaze. "Nothing," I whispered, too quickly, too breathless, and the faint twitch of his mouth told me he had heard the fracture in my voice. He reached out, gently, terrifyingly gentle, and brushed a strand of hair from my face, his fingertips lingering at my temple. "Cristina," he murmured, "I married you because I thought you understood me. If you start hiding things already, we'll ruin everything." The words were tender, yet they slithered with threat, coiling around my ribs until I could hardly breathe. I forced myself to nod, to mimic submission, and he leaned back, settling into the pillow as though the conversation were over. But I knew better. He wasn't letting this go. He was storing it, cataloguing it, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I turned away, pressing the phone closer to my body, desperate for it to be a shield instead of a curse. The screen buzzed again, and though I didn't dare look, the vibration felt like a drumbeat counting down to something inevitable. My mind screamed at me to get out, to run, to escape this room, this man, this marriage that already felt like a trap snapping shut. But then came the sound that froze me in, placed the unmistakable creak of the door handle turning, slow and deliberate, even though Adrian had locked it earlier. Someone else was in the hallway, and they were trying to come in. The metallic groan of the handle twisted through the silence like a warning cry, and for the first time since our vows, Adrian moved with something raw, almost frantic. He bolted upright, muscles taut, every trace of calm obliterated, and in that instant, I knew the lock had never been enough to keep whatever haunted us at bay. My body went rigid as the knob rattled once, twice, then paused, as though the unseen visitor was testing the strength of both, the lock and our courage. I clutched the blanket tighter around me, my knuckles white, heart slamming so violently against my ribs that I thought it might shatter me from within. Adrian pressed a finger to his lips again, that silent command I now despised, before sliding off the bed. His movements were sleek, practiced, terrifyingly methodical, as if he had done this before, as if he was used to being hunted, or worse, to hunting others. He reached into his jacket, draped carelessly over a chair, and withdrew a small black object that glinted in the dim light. A knife. My stomach lurched, bile rising to my throat, because the man who was supposed to be my protector had armed himself with the kind of weapon that spoke of premeditation, not defense. The handle jiggled once more, harder this time, and then came the soft, almost polite knock. 3 taps. Slow. Deliberate. Adrian's jaw tightened, and instead of answering, he stepped back, pulling me with him toward the far wall as though positioning us for an ambush. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, to flee into the hallway, regardless of the danger waiting outside, but my voice was strangled by terror. The knocking stopped, replaced by silence so thick it felt like cotton stuffed into my ears. Then, from beyond the door, a voice drifted in a woman's voice, low and urgent. "Cristina, don't let him fool you. He's not your husband." My knees nearly buckled, and I looked at Adrian in horror, but his face was unreadable, carved from stone. He didn't flinch, didn't react, only stared at me with eyes that seemed to demand, "Whose side are you on?" The sound of my own name, spoken by that stranger in the hallway, split something inside me, like a crack running through glass, fragile yet unstoppable. My legs trembled under the weight of fear and confusion, but beneath it all, a sharper thread of anger began to pulse. How could this be happening on my wedding night? How could I already be questioning whether the man standing before me, the man I had promised my life to, was even who he claimed? Adrian's gaze drilled into me, a silent battle waged in his eyes. He dared me to believe the voice outside, to betray him with the flicker of doubt across my face. My throat was raw, but I managed a whisper, trembling and uneven. "Who is she?" His lips barely moved as he hissed, "No one." The knife in his hand glimmered as he tightened his grip, and my heart shrank at the thought that the weapon wasn't meant for whoever lurked outside but for me, should I choose the wrong answer. The door rattled again, and the voice pressed harder, more insistent. "Cristina, he's lying to you. He isn't who you think he is. He doesn't even go by Adrian." My breath shattered into pieces, because the way she said it wasn't wild or hysterical. It was calm, steady, the tone of someone who knew me, someone desperate to save me. Adrian moved then, quick as a striking panther, and slammed his palm against the door with a violence that made the frame shudder. "Leave us," he bellowed, his calm mask finally cracking into something feral. My pulse surged as he turned back to me, his voice low and trembling with fury. "Don't you dare listen to her. Don't you dare." His eyes bore into me, daring me to disobey. My hands clutched the sheets, trembling, torn between the familiarity of the man I had chosen and the chilling truth of the warnings I was receiving. The silence stretched again, broken only by the faint scrape of footsteps retreating down the hall, leaving me with a husband I no longer recognized, and a question that burned hotter than fear itself. Had I just been saved? Or abandoned? The echo of those retreating steps lingered long after the hallway had fallen silent, wrapping the room in an even darker stillness. I sat frozen, every muscle locked, but my mind was unraveling at a terrifying speed. A stranger had called out my name with certainty, had spoken with authority about the man I had married, and yet here I was, trapped in a suite with him, unable to tell truth from manipulation. Adrian paced the carpet in slow, controlled strides, knife still clutched in his hand, his every movement a calculated act designed to intimidate me. He no longer tried to wear the mask of charm. The polite groom had vanished, and in his place stood a man stripped bare of pretense, radiating a kind of cold rage that made the air itself heavier. "She's trying to poison you against me," he muttered, almost to himself, though his eyes never left me. "She's always tried. They can't stand to see me happy. To see us happy." His words tumbled out too quickly, too rehearsed, as though he had said them before to someone else, in another life. My skin prickled with realization. Whoever that woman was, this wasn't the first time she had warned someone. My chest constricted, and I dared to whisper, "Who is she?" The silence that followed was worse than any answer. Adrian stopped pacing, his head tilting slightly, a smile pulling at his lips that had no warmth in it whatsoever. "She's no one you'll ever need to worry about again," he said, voice smooth as glass but dangerous as a shard. The way he said it made my stomach twist violently, because it wasn't just a dismissal, it was a promise. My gaze darted to the phone in my lap, praying for another message, another clue, anything to anchor me to reality. As if on cue, the device buzzed. With trembling hands, I shielded it from his sight, angling the screen just enough to see the new words. "If you want to survive, don't let him see the scar behind his ear." My breath caught. ice flooding my veins because it was a detail no stranger could have known one. I had noticed earlier while adjusting his collar, a mark he had brushed off as nothing. The room tilted, and suddenly the question wasn't whether Adrian was lying. It was, who was the man I had married at all? The scar. My mind replayed the moment in the church dressing room, when I had fussed over Adrian's collar and my fingers had brushed the faint ridge of skin behind his ear. He had stiffened then, only for a heartbeat, and covered it with a casual smile that now rang false in my memory. A scar isn't suspicious in itself, but the way he had hidden it, the way the message singled it out, made my blood run cold. I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hand, as Adrian moved closer, his eyes glinting with suspicion that deepened with every second of my silence. "What's wrong, Cristina?" he asked softly, his knife lowered but still in his grip. The softness was worse than shouting. It was a predator's purr, the tone of someone coaxing a victim to step willingly into the trap. I forced myself to swallow the rising panic, but the truth pressed against my lips like a scream begging for release. Instead, I whispered, "Tell me the truth. Who are you really?" The words slipped out, trembling, but once spoken they couldn't be recalled. For the first time, his face cracked not in rage, but in something almost like amusement. He chuckled low, shaking his head as though I were a child who had stumbled onto a game far beyond her comprehension. "Does it matter?" he murmured, stepping close, enough that I could smell the faint trace of cologne mixed with something metallic, something sharp. "You're mine now. That's all that should matter." My skin crawled at the possessiveness in his tone, and I tightened my grip on the phone, desperate for another clue, another warning, anything. But before I could glance at it again, Adrian's hand shot out, fast as lightning, and wrenched it from my grasp. His thumb hovered over the screen, his smile fading into a mask of ice as he read the message. When his gaze snapped back to me, it was darker than I had ever seen, filled with a violence so raw it made the room tilt. "So," he whispered, "they told you." His voice carried both fury and something like fear, and in that moment I realized the scar wasn't just a detail, it was the key to everything he had been hiding. Adrian's eyes bore into me with such force, I thought I would collapse under their weight, but survival whispered through my veins louder than fear. The scar was the key. The message had said, and in that instant I understood, whoever had warned me wasn't just a stranger. They were someone who had seen this monster before, someone who knew what lay beneath the carefully curated mask. My gaze flickered to the scar, that faint pale line just hidden by his hairline, and suddenly I realized it wasn't just a mark. It was surgical. Something implanted. Something that didn't belong to the man standing before me, or perhaps proof that he wasn't the man he claimed at all. My voice, though trembling, cut through the silence. "You're not Adrian." The effect was instant. His smile twisted, his knife hand trembling as though my words had pierced deeper than any blade could. He leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered, "You should have stayed ignorant. You were safer that way." But even as he said it, his confidence faltered. The truth had been dragged into the light, and he knew it. My heart hammered as the phone in his hand buzzed again. For a heartbeat, his eyes darted downward, and in that single moment of distraction, instinct overpowered terror. I lunged, slamming my palm against his wrist, sending the knife clattering across the floor. He cursed, his composure shattering, but I was already moving, snatching the phone, sprinting toward the door, the weight of betrayal and revelation burning behind me. His footsteps thundered after mine, but the message on the glowing screen steadied me. "Keep running. He won't make it past dawn." My pulse surged with something sharp and unfamiliar, not just fear, but defiance, strength, resilience. I was no longer the bride trembling beneath his shadow. I was the woman who had seen through the lie, who would not be erased. As I flung the door open and vanished into the corridor's darkness, my voice, my story rose inside me like fire. And now I turn to you, the listener of this nightmare. Remember my words. Remember my scarred wedding night. Because truth, betrayal, and survival are stories that must be shared. If you want to know how I transform this terror into justice, if you want to walk with me through every twist of revenge, every step of resilience, every breath of survival, then stay with me. Like this story. Subscribe to my journey. Because the night is only beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next.